Володимире, дорогий друже, пані та панове, kıymetli Kırım sakinleri, kıymetli Kırım dostlarımız. Крим – bu Україна. Крим – це Україна. Так як Гданськ чи Люблін є частиною Польщі, так Крим був, є і буде частиною України. Panie i panowie, prezydenci, premierzy, ministrowie, przedstawiciele państw i narodów. Zacząłem od rzeczy oczywistej, bo mam wrażenie, że w ostatnich latach była właśnie ona zbyt mało oczywista. Pamiętam doskonale pierwsze posiedzenie Platformy Krymskiej rok temu i to, że to był czas, w którym nas, prezydentów i premierów, było tutaj raptem kilka, może kilkanaście osób. Panowało wówczas zupełnie inne myślenie w Europie. Tak jak gdyby Krym po prostu przepadł i że choć my, Zachód, nigdy tego nie uznamy, to musimy się z tym pogodzić, że Krym jest pod rosyjską okupacją, dla niektórych wręcz, że Krym staje się Rosją. A ja jeszcze raz powtarzam, Krym był i jest taką samą częścią Ukrainy, jak Gdańsk albo Lublin są częściami Polski, jak Nicea jest częścią Francji, jak Kolonia jest częścią Niemiec, tak jak Rotterdam jest częścią Holandii. Myślę, że wielu z nas musi zrobić pewien rachunek sumienia za to, co stało się w ciągu ostatniego roku.
Was the de facto agreement to the occupation of Crimea not a false message sent by many countries towards Russia, that the appeasement policy could be applied and that such policy would somehow soften the policy of the occupier, that one could conduct business as usual? And let me remind you that Nord Stream 2 was built already after the illegal annexation of Crimea. So, ladies and gentlemen, there is no return to business as usual in relations with Russia. There is no return to business as usual in relations with Russia, for sure. In the time when Russia is conducting a war against Ukraine, which it attacked, when Russia is occupying the legally and internationally recognized lands of Ukraine. And the true moment of change in the policy of the West will be not only stopping Nord Stream 2, but also its dismantling, getting rid, liquidation of this gas pipeline. Ladies and gentlemen, I believe that today, after Mariupol, Bucha, after bombs dropping on Kiev and Kharkiv, after missiles reaching Lviv, after Irpin and Borodyanka, after crimes, after the war of Russia against Ukraine, through the destruction and degradation of Ukraine, we all have to be clear and say Russia has the duty not only to go back to the line from the 23rd of February, it also has to take into account the right of Ukraine to liberate all of its internationally recognized territory, including Crimea. Let me share a personal reflection with you. I have never visited Crimea myself, although I always wanted to feel its exceptional magic, the magic of that place, so beautifully described by the poet Adam Mickiewicz, a common poet of Poland and Lithuania. I believed that Crimea was so close from Poland, and I believe that I always have the time to reach it. And as long as after 2014, I could just for a while think that I missed the moment, then in 2022, I believe that I will see Crimea, the Ukrainian Crimea. I believe, Volodymyr, that you will show Crimea to me. I will be there. However, today we are facing up to the Russian invasion. Ukrainian men and women are protecting Europe with arms in their hands against tyranny and totalitarianism. They are paying the highest price for Warsaw, for Prague, for Berlin, for Paris, for London. In this war, Poland is your background, Ukraine. Poland is your ally. Poland is your home. Brothers for all children and all families who will seek refuge in Poland. All those who will feel such a need will find home in Poland, and there is no dispute about this in Poland. If any of my predecessors and successors of the President of the Republic of Poland was sitting in my place, he would say exactly the same thing. As long as you need us, we are there and we will stay at your side.
Szanowny panie prezydenте, mій друже Володимире, дорогі українські браття, ще не вимерла Україна, jeszcze Polska nie zginęła.
Poland has not yet perished.
And Volodymyr, dear friends, Ukrainian.
Thank you, Mr. President. And now, with great pleasure, I invite Prime Minister of Canada, His Excellency Mr. Justin Trudeau, to take the floor.
My friends, President Zelensky, Volodymyr, Mustafa Aga, leader of the Crimean Tatar people, partners, allies, I'm joining you today from Toronto with the German Chancellor, my friend Olaf Scholz. Last year, when Canada participated in the first Crimea Platform summit, no one yet knew that Vladimir Putin would launch a full-scale, unprovoked invasion of the rest of Ukraine. Today, on the eve of Ukraine's Independence Day, we're here to reaffirm our steadfast support for the full restoration of your independence, territorial integrity, and sovereignty. We're here to remind the world that within Ukraine's internationally recognized borders, there is Crimea. Crimea is a part of Ukraine, not a part of Russia. In fact, we can't forget that Putin's invasion of Ukraine really started in 2014 with the attempted annexation and illegal occupation of Crimea and the city of Sevastopol. The Ukrainian people have the right to defend themselves, including in Crimea. So Canada will continue to be there to support you, and we know that our allies, like Germany, will continue to do the same. Le Canada va toujours être là pour soutenir la démocratie et le respect du système international fondé sur des règles. Quand la Russie a envahi la Crimée, elle s'est attaquée.
Based on the rules, when Russia invaded Ukraine, they attacked the basic principles and rights. This is unacceptable. Back in May, I was in Ukraine, and I saw all the brutality of war waged by Volodymyr Putin.
Since 2014, Canada, with our partners, has imposed hard-hitting sanctions against over 1,750 individuals and entities from Russia, Ukraine, and Belarus. And today we're announcing new sanctions on 62 additional individuals and one defense sector entity that is complicit in Russia's war in Ukraine. We should all be deeply concerned about the consequences of Russia's war, both in Ukraine and around the world. This includes inflation, as well as economic, energy, and food insecurity. Through the IMF, we recently provide $450 million in loans to Ukraine to support the purchase of necessary heating fuel before winter. We've now disbursed the complete $1.95 billion in loans committed this year. For food security, Canada proposed an initiative with the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations, and we're investing $52 million to help address grain storage shortages in Ukraine. I want to repeat yet again that there are no sanctions on food. When the Russian regime blames sanctions for the food crisis around the world, they're engaging in disinformation. We need to continue fighting Russian disinformation. That's why Canada will create a dedicated team to help increase our capacity to monitor and detect Russian and other state-sponsored disinformation. With this initiative, we will enable deeper international collaboration, including through the G7 Rapid Response Mechanism. Canada will also provide additional support to Ukraine's security sector institutions through two different projects. The first will support the National Police of Ukraine and Ukraine's state emergency services, including with the provision of essential equipment and supplies. And the second is focused on providing technical advice and support to Ukraine's Ministry of Defense. On ne doit pas s'habituer à cette guerre de la Russie et à ses horreurs. On doit continuer d'être là pour nos amis ukrainiens, Merci de m'avoir donné l'occasion de parler aujourd'hui et merci à tous les participants de continuer à faire leur part. We all remain steadfast
Thank you for participation in this and the opportunity to participate in this meeting. Я хочу передати слово Олафу Шольцу.
Thank you, Your Excellency, and naturally, the floor now goes to the Federal Chancellor of Germany, Olaf Scholz. Sir, please.
President Zelensky, Justin, dear colleagues and friends of Ukraine, thank you very much for the invitation to this year's Crimea Platform Summit. 8 years after Russia's illegal annexation of Crimea and 6 months after the beginning of Russia's latest blatant war of aggression, it is more than timely to come together with partners in this important forum. Today, on the day we commemorate the victims of Stalinism and fascism, we make once again clear that the international community will never accept Russia's illegal imperialist annexation of Ukraine territory. Russian unprovoked and unjustified war of aggression against Ukraine has been met with a courageous defense by the Ukrainian people. To them, I pay my utmost respect. Their resolve and bravery are admired all over the world. They reject a world where might makes right, where great powers can just swallow up smaller states if they like. This summit demonstrates that today Ukraine's partners are more united than ever. I can assure you, today as in Elmau, when I met with my fellow leaders of the G7, Germany stands firmly by the side of Ukraine for as long as Ukraine needs our support. We will uphold our unprecedented sanctions together with partners. We will support Ukraine financially. We will continue to supply weapons. We have put on track a new package, including another modern air defense systems, rocket launchers, and tons of ammunition, anti-drone devices, and armed recovery vehicles. Our hospitals will continue to treat wounded Ukrainians. Our borders, our schools, and our labor market will remain open to all who must flee Russia's terror. What is equally important, together with our partners and allies, we have intensified our outreach to third countries to further strengthen the international support of Ukraine. Under the German G7 presidency, Argentina, Senegal, South Africa, India and Indonesia were invited to the Elmau summit as partner countries and were closely involved in our discussions on the repercussions of the Russian war of aggression. Be it via G7, the EU, the United Nations or the Crimea Platform, we will continue our international outreach and underline the global dimension of this conflict. We condemn Russia's attempts to forcefully integrate parts of Ukrainian territory. Our message is clear. Any sham referenda or other attempts to alter the status of parts of Ukraine territory will never be recognized, and that such steps preclude any negotiation approaches. It is Russia, with its war of aggression, that is responsible for worsening food security, with grave implications for people worldwide. As a reaction to this crisis, at this year's summit in Elmau, the G7 provided an additional $4.5 billion support for global food security. We welcome the recent United Nations agreement on grain exports via maritime safe corridors. As European Union, we have facilitated grain exports via land and rivers, thus exporting over 8 million tons of Ukrainian grain between April and early August through our solidarity lanes. We also see that storage capacities in Ukraine are still under pressure. To address this, Canada, Germany and Japan are financing with over $60 million a new program of the Food and Agricultural Organization. This program will, in coordination with the Ukrainian government, support small and medium-sized farms with temporary and fixed storage solutions for grain and oil seeds. In addition, the international community also has to engage actively in the long-term reconstruction of Ukraine. Bearing in mind the size of the challenge, we need to accelerate the work that we started in Lugano. In support of this process, In my capacity as President of the G7 and together with the European Commission, I will host an international high-level expert conference for reconstruction in Berlin in October. We want to bring in international expertise as early as possible and take forward the proposals that are already on the table. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm certain Ukraine will overcome the dark shadow of war because it is strong, brave and united in its fight for independence and sovereignty, and because it has friends in Europe and all over the world. I wish my Ukrainian colleagues and friends a safe celebration of their National Independence Day tomorrow. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chancellor. And the next speaker is the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, His Excellency, Mr. Boris Johnson.
I want to congratulate President Volodymyr Zelensky particularly for bringing us together and for focusing our attention on Russia's illegal annexation of Crimea, because that land grab in 2014 was the direct precursor of today's war, and we should have the humility to acknowledge that not everybody realized the sheer enormity of what was happening at the time. All of our countries, however, reacted with strength and unity after Putin escalated his onslaught against Ukraine on the 24th of February this year. But the first act of this tragedy happened exactly 8 years earlier, almost to the day, when Russian forces began fanning out across Crimea and taking control of a peninsula which constitutes 10,000 square miles of sovereign Ukrainian territory. At a stroke, Putin forcibly annexed the territory of a European country and forcibly redrew a European frontier for the first time since 1945. He ignored the fact that Russia itself had repeatedly recognized Crimea as being part of Ukraine. And he broke so many international agreements that I can't list them all, but they include Article 2 of the United Nations Charter, the Helsinki Final Act, and the Russia-Ukraine Treaty of Friendship. And ever since the annexation, the people of Crimea have endured a brutal and systematic campaign of human rights abuses by the Russian authorities, including the persecution of the Tatars, arbitrary arrests with a tenfold increase in detentions last year, and the restriction of land ownership to Russian citizens. Once he grabbed Crimea, Putin deployed more and more Russian forces in the peninsula, turning the territory into an armed camp from which to threaten the rest of Ukraine. And so Crimea duly became the launch pad for the invasion on the 24th of February, or one of the launch pads. And I'm afraid that all this has even greater salience today because Putin is planning to do to other parts of Ukraine, indeed all of Ukraine, what he has done to Crimea. And he is preparing more annexations and more sham referendums. So it has never been more important for us all to stand together in defense of the foundational principle of international law, which is that no territory, no country can acquire territory or change borders by force of arms. And so it follows that we will never recognize Russia's annexation of Crimea or any other Ukrainian territory. In the face of Putin's assault, we must continue to give our Ukrainian friends all the military, humanitarian, economic, and diplomatic support that they need until Russia ends this hideous war and withdraws its forces from the entirety of Ukraine. Thank you all very much.
Thank you, Prime Minister. Our next speaker is His Excellency, Mr. Emmanuel Macron, President of France.
Monsieur le Président de l'Ukraine, cher Volodymyr, Mesdames et Messieurs les chefs d'État et de gouvernement,
Mr. President, ladies and gentlemen, dear heads of states and governments, ministers, ambassadors, dear friends, it's been 8 years since the Russian illegal annexation of the part of Ukraine, more specifically the Autonomous Republic of Crimea and the city of Sebastopol. And thus it has violated the fundamental norms of the international law. France it defends the norms that guarantee the international security. This is why France has always supported the sovereignty and territorial integrity of Ukraine and will continue to do so. The occupation of Crimea by Russia is a clear deterioration of the situation with the human rights on the territory of the Crimea, and we've seen this and we've mentioned this during the General Assembly of the UN. And local population suffers because of that. I would like to remind Russia of its commitment on compliance with the norms of international law. A year ago, we've already met to condemn the annexation of the Crimean Peninsula. Unfortunately, Ukraine has selected the path of diplomacy, while Russia has selected the path of war. And once again, it has violated the fundamentals of the international law and starting its full-scale aggression on the 24th of February. France and the European Union, as well as other allies to Ukraine, shall support your struggle, your defense, because this is a justice struggle for your sovereignty, for your territorial integrity, and our decisiveness was not changed. We are ready to continue with our efforts on the long-term perspective. The international community condemned this aggression, and I would like to say on behalf of all of our European friends, the friends from Africa, from Asia, from Latin America. What is happening now in Ukraine is not only about the Ukrainian people. Of course, primarily this is the fight of Ukrainian people for its independence and freedom, but it's all about all of us, because we feel the consequences of this war, and it has to do with all of the other countries. It destabilizes the international norms and rules. There's humanitarian consequences, the consequences in terms of energy and food supplies. All of these is the consequence of the choice made of Russia, that is to attack Ukraine on the 24th of February. The war started by Russia is the war against the very principles of the international law that regulates our relationship. Many countries that have gathered today, that struggled for its own freedom, decolonization, they're here with us today because they have protected their own rights for self-determination. What is happening today is not only a war on the territory of Europe, it's all about the universal principles. There is our ability to live in peace and friendship with respect to sovereignty, territorial integrity, which are the fundamental and major values and the principles of the international order, which serve as the preconditions for guaranteeing the peace. Russia has made choice, despite its commitments that they've taken 30 years ago. Russia has made his choice to step away from those principles, and we believe this is a weakness. It's all about the freedom of all us and the peace in all parts of the world. This is why I would like to call upon Russia to cease the military actions and to withdraw its forces from the territory of Ukraine and to use all forms of diplomacy in order to protect Ukraine, its territory and its future. Recently, we've seen that the war is also about the Crimea, just as the rest of the Ukrainian territory of the past 6 months. Today, we've seen a lot of victims and casualties among the Ukrainian population, and I would like to express words of condolences to the families of the victims of this aggression. Mr. President, Volodymyr, allow me once again to reaffirm my respect, the respect of the people of France with the struggle, with the defense waged by the people of Ukraine every day. This is the fight for your sovereignty, your future, your children, and this is the fight for our universal principles. This is what I wanted to say today in my statement through video conference. Today, the future of Ukraine is being decided, and we shall stay together with you today, tomorrow, the day after tomorrow. But I wanted to say that this is also a fight for the principles of international law that has to do
Thank you,
with
Mr. President.
the case of all of us.
And our next speaker is His Excellency Mario Draghi, Prime Minister of Italy.
Dear President Zelensky, dear colleagues, on the second anniversary of the international Crimea Platform, I wish to express Italy's unwavering support for this initiative and for Ukraine. Russia's occupation of the Crimean Peninsula in March 2014 was an unacceptable act of aggression, a clear violation of international law. Italy has constantly condemned Russia's illegal annexation of Crimea and Moscow's gradual militarization of the peninsula. We are deeply concerned for the worsening situation of human rights in the peninsula, and we stand with the Crimean Tatar community against the violence and injustice it suffers from. The fight for Crimea is part of the struggle to liberate Ukraine. Last February, Russian forces used Crimea as a launch pad for their attack on the regions of southern Ukraine, including Kherson. They continue to use Crimea to put military pressure on other areas, notably the port cities of Mykolaiv and Odessa. As Russia attempts to subjugate more parts of Ukrainian territory, the international community cannot look away. Russia must stop its illegal occupation, its brutal targeting of unnamed civilians. Italy will continue to support Ukraine. We are with you in your fight to resist Russia's invasion, restore Ukraine's territorial integrity, protect your democracy and independence. Thank you.
Thank you, Prime Minister. Our next speaker comes from Asia, and it will be the distinguished Prime Minister of Japan, Kishida Fumio. For some technical reasons, we will return to His Excellency Prime Minister of Japan in a couple of minutes, and I will now give the floor to President of the European Council, His Excellency Mr. Charles Michel. Sir, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you for giving me the floor. Dear President Zelensky, Dear friends, excellencies, Crimea is Ukraine, and I start with the same and clear message I had the occasion to convey last year when I had the occasion to take part in the first Crimea Platform in Kiev that you initiated, dear Volodymyr. The European Union does not and will not recognize the illegal annexation of Crimea and Sevastopol. Russia's aggression against Ukraine did not start on February 24th. It started in 2014 with the illegal annexation of Crimea. And this was the beginning of Russia's aggressive and unlawful acts against your country and against your people. This war has caused unspeakable suffering for millions of Ukrainian families. And since February, Russia has used Crimea as a strategic springboard to invade other parts of Ukraine from the south and to attack Ukraine with indiscriminate missile strikes. Russia is also using Crimea as a transit point to deport Ukrainian citizens through infamous filtration camps and where acts of torture and abuse have been reported. Crimea has become a transportation hub for grain stolen from other parts of Ukraine, and Russia's military presence in Crimea has enforced his blockade of Ukrainian Black Sea ports, and we have seen the brutal consequences: damage to the Ukrainian economy and a global food security crisis, especially in vulnerable countries. Let's be clear, this is a deliberate and cynical choice by the Kremlin, a deliberate decision to weaponize hunger and to try to weaken international support for Ukraine. And that's why we welcome the recent grain deal signed in Istanbul and the departure of the first commercial ships from Ukraine's Black Sea ports. And we commend the UN Secretary General's action to make this deal a reality. We will remain extremely vigilant to make sure Russia implements this deal fully and in good faith. Ladies and gentlemen, dear friends, we also want to express our grave concerns about the repeated challenge at the Zaporizhzhia nuclear plant. Russia's actions are risking a nuclear disaster, and this is a moment for caution and restraint. We fully support the efforts made by Secretary General Guterres and the United Nations. Russia must immediately give access to UN experts, and we also support establishing a demilitarized zone around the nuclear power plants. Finally, ladies and gentlemen, dear Volodymyr, dear friends, the European Union has been rock solid in our support for Ukraine's sovereignty and territorial integrity since 2014, and our support for your country is unprecedented. We have repeatedly condemned this war in the strongest possible terms. We have called out Russia's atrocities against Ukrainian civilians, and we've demanded that Russia fully respect international humanitarian law. We are also actively supporting the ICC investigation into war crimes, and we have also adopted the most hard-hitting sanctions ever against Russia. We have also bolstered our already substantial support to Ukraine with humanitarian aid, with macro-financial assistance, with support for refugees, and with unprecedented military support. We are also committed to Ukraine's bright and prosperous future, and we are ready to play a major role in international efforts for the reconstruction of Ukraine. Dear President Zelensky, since March, the European Council has clearly stated that Ukraine belongs to our European family, and in June, we formally granted candidate status. Dear Ukrainian friends and brothers, let me repeat one more time, loud and clear. Your future lies within the European Union, and your bravery is an example for all of us. And dear Andrzej Duda, I have the same dream, I hope. I have also the occasion to pay a visit with you, Volodymyr, to Crimea. The EU is right by your side in these dramatic times, and we will stay there for as long as it takes. I call on all countries around the world to clearly condemn Russia's illegal actions. Ukraine's full territorial integrity within its internationally recognized borders must be restored. Crimea is Ukraine. Ukraine is Ukraine. You can count on us. Slava Ukraini. Thank you.
Heroyam Slava, Mr. President. And the next speaker on my list is Her Excellency President of the European Commission, Ursula von der Leyen. Madam President, the floor is yours.
President Zelensky, dear Volodymyr, President Duda, distinguished guests. In February and March of 2014, Russia carried out its annexation of the Crimean Peninsula through brutal force. This brazen violation of Ukraine's territorial integrity and international law marked the beginning of Putin's deplorable attempt to deny Ukraine its freedom. It was a direct response to Ukraine's revolution of dignity, in which brave Ukrainian citizens demanded justice, democracy, and the right to choose their own future in Europe. Crimea has since then been used not only as a Russian military base, but also as a testing ground for the brutal methods Russia is now applying across the other occupied parts of Ukraine. You know that the European Union is Ukraine's closest friend and a staunch defender of international law. We will never recognize the illegal annexation of Crimea and Sevastopol by the Russian Federation. We are deeply concerned about the human rights violations in the Crimean Peninsula, the disappearances, the torture, the killings, the persecution of Crimean Tatars, the intimidation and incarceration of journalists, lawyers, and human rights defenders. This is the dark reality of Putin's occupation. The European Union will tirelessly work with the Ukrainian authorities and our partners to expose these violations, to hold those responsible accountable, and to support the victims. We are with you. We have been with you in this existential fight from the beginning. Since Russia's full-blown assault in February, we have massively stepped up our economic, humanitarian, and military support. We have welcomed over 7.5 million Ukrainian refugees into our homes. Our sanctions are critically undermining Putin's war machine and the Russian economy. EU solidarity lanes helped export over 10 million tons of Ukrainian grain. And we will continue to help you get the grain out that has been stuck in Ukrainian ports due to Russia's cynical blockade. The European Union will continue to stand with Ukraine for as long as it takes. Putin wanted to thwart Ukraine's independence and break your belief in a better future. The opposite has happened. Not only is Ukraine celebrating its 31st year of independence tomorrow, but you have also become a candidate to join the European Union. Our people have never been closer, and our commitment to a free and democratic Ukraine has never been stronger. Slava Ukraini.
Thank you, Madam President. As President Zelensky mentioned in his remarks, we will become members of the European Union together with Crimea, and Crimeans will be part of Europe as citizens of Ukraine. We have fixed technical problems which allows us to go back to Asia and to listen to the remarks of His Excellency Prime Minister of Japan, Kishida Fumio. Please.
日本国総理大臣の岸田文雄です。ウクライナが大きな困難に直面する中で、今回の首脳会合を主催されるゼレンスキー大統領のリーダーシップに最大限の敬意を表するとともに、ウクライナ政府、ウクライナ国民の皆様との連帯を改めて 強調したいと思います。ロシアによるウクライナ侵略は、欧州のみならずアジアを含む国際秩序の根幹を揺るがす暴挙です。日本はクリミアを含めたウクライナの主権及び領土一体性を一貫して支持し、一方的な現状変更の試みには断じて反対します。特に広島出身の総理大臣として核兵器の使用、威嚇も決して許しません。日本は強力な対ロ制裁を講じるとともに、人道支援、財政支援、装備品等の提供、物資輸送支援等のウクライナ支援を実施してきました。今後も先般の G7 エルマウサミットにおいて発表したウクライナの穀物貯蔵能力強化に向けた支援、国際的な食糧危機への対応のための追加支援を含め、総額約11億ドルの支援を実施していきます。ロシアによるウクライナ侵略が長期化する中、国際社会が結束して対応することが重要です。アジア唯一のG7 メンバーとして私自らこれまでにインドや東南アジア諸国をはじめとする各地域の首脳との間で対話を重ね、国際社会の原則を守ることの重要性で一致してきました。今週末の日本がチュニジアで開催する TICAD8 の機会を捉えたアフリカ諸国への働きかけなど、これからも我が国独自の取り組みを全力で進めていきます。日本は来年 G7 の議長国を務めますが、ウクライナにおける一刻も早い平和の回復及び復興の実現に向け、国際社会と緊密に連携しつつ、また日本の経験を生かし、最大限の努力、積極的な貢献を続けていきます。
Thank you, Prime Minister. And we will now go to the entire Euro-Atlantic space. And I cordially invite His Excellency, Secretary General of NATO, Jens Stoltenberg, to take the floor.
Thank you so much, President Zelensky, President Duda, friends of Ukraine. 8 years ago, Russia illegally annexed Crimea, transforming it into one of the most militarized areas in Europe, and using it as a launchpad for a full-scale invasion of Ukraine 6 months ago. President Putin thought he could crush the Ukrainian people and armed forces. He thought he could divide our democratic nations, and he thought he could dictate what others do. President Putin was wrong. The presence of so many friends of Ukraine here today proves this. Ukraine has suffered 6 terrible months of war, but you have also shown your incredible ability to resist brutal aggression, to strike back, retake territory, and impose major costs on Russia. NATO stands in full solidarity with Ukraine. Allies fully support Ukraine's sovereignty and territorial integrity, your right to self-defense and to choose your own path. President Putin started this unjustified war. He must stop this war and withdraw his forces from Ukraine. NATO has stood with Ukraine since your independence. We significantly stepped up our support after the illegal annexation of Crimea. When Russia invaded again, this helped make the Ukrainian armed forces stronger, better trained and better led than in 2014. And since February, NATO allies have provided unprecedented military, financial and humanitarian aid. NATO is part of the US-led Ukraine Defense Contact Group to mobilize support. and I actively engage with leaders to urge them to provide more weapons and more ammunition more quickly. At our Madrid NATO summit in June, we agreed a strengthened package of assistance, including fuel, food, medical supplies, protective military gear, and secure communications, as well as equipment to counter mines, drones, chemical and biological threats. And we have over a dozen new projects in preparation for the winter. At the same time, we have strengthened our presence in the east of the alliance, because NATO's security guarantees leave no room for miscalculation in Moscow, and they enable allies to support Ukraine's right to self-defense. We are committed to our partnership with Ukraine for long term. We will help Ukraine transition from Soviet era to NATO standard equipment, continue your defense and security sector reform, and help you on the path of post-war reconstruction. Winter is coming, and it will be hard. And what we see now is a grinding war of attrition. This is a battle of wills and a battle of logistics. Therefore, we must sustain our support for Ukraine for the long term, so that Ukraine prevails as a sovereign, independent nation. A strong, stable and independent Ukraine is essential to Euro-Atlantic security. NATO has stood with Ukraine throughout 3 decades of independence. We stand with Ukraine now. We will continue to stand with Ukraine for as long as it takes.
Thank you, Secretary General. Now, I would like to take you back to the last year when Nariman Jilal, first Deputy Chairman of the Mejlis of the Crimean Tatar people, took part in the summit, in the first inaugural summit of the Crimea Platform. And as President Zelensky mentioned in his introductory remarks, upon returning to Crimea, Mr. Jilal had been taken by the Russian security forces. His only connection with the world from a dark prison is letters. And I invite you to watch a short video with the involvement of his wife, Levisa Jalalova.
Как ты, родная? Мне не спится. Сейчас ночь субботы на воскресенье.
This is night from Saturday to Sunday. I have slept during the day and now I cannot sleep. I think about you, about our children. I envy you so much. I know it's not easy for you, but you are next to them, to our little ones. It's difficult to think that they're growing up without me, especially Niall. She just starting to walk, talk, and do something new and funny. I'm afraid that she will have to get to know me once again. I have one day like another. Time is very slow. Just 1 month has passed, another month. I feel depressed, but I try to fend depression off. Not today, though. Nothing compares to this. But don't you worry. I just need to share this with you. There is nobody else to share it with. I'm still confident in you and your strength. Do not be afraid to be weak. And we have to live, we have to host guests, invite friends. Just remember that you are the most loved and one for me and my closest friend. No one is dearer to me than you and our children. So do everything to make your life full. That will make me stronger and more confident, and I'll fight here. This is the shortest word to you. No.
It would be an exaggeration to say that the remarks by Nariman at the last summit of the Crimea Platform were very moving. But these words that we just heard, they are deeply touching and deeply motivational. They motivate all of us to fight for his freedom, but also for the freedom of the entire peninsula. And of course, after listening to the words of a brave man, Nariman Jalal, I would like to give the floor to another brave man, leader of the Crimean Tatar people, Mr. Mustafa Džemilev. Mustafa, слово надається вам.
Under the occupation regime, this event brings hope to many people. A year ago exactly, to provide for the rule of law and full restoration of territorial integrity of Ukraine in order to strengthen peaceful diplomatic